Have you ever wondered if your personality was shaped before you ever had a chance to choose it? What if the moment you were born, not just the day or season, but your exact position in the family, quietly decided the kind of love you would chase, the roles you would play, and the wounds you would carry through life? Most people think birth order is just trivia, something you bring up at dinner parties or see in memes. But what if it's far more than that? What if your place among your siblings was the first mirror life held up to you, showing you who you were supposed to become before you ever had the language to ask who you really are? According to Jung, our earliest identities are shaped not just by what happens to us, but by the roles we silently absorb in our family constellation. And birth order is the invisible script that often decides these roles. You didn't choose to be the first, the middle, the youngest, or the only. But once that position was assigned, it began to sculpt your internal world, your sense of responsibility, your patterns of people-pleasing, your fear of being forgotten, your need to stand out or stay small. Without realizing it, your family became your first psychological ecosystem, and your birth order determined your archetypal task within it. Were you the hero child, praised for your maturity but never allowed to fall apart? The peacemaker, always softening the edges between louder voices, but secretly wondering if anyone ever truly saw you? The wild one, labeled the rebel, but only because that was the only way left to be noticed? The lone soul, raised without siblings, wrapped in silence, burdened with wisdom no one your age could understand. These aren't just labels, they are imprints, emotional blueprints forged in the earliest years of your life. Jung believed that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. And your birth order is often one of the most unconscious factors guiding your inner world. It affects how you relate to authority, love, independence, creativity, and even your spirituality. So, the question is not whether your birth order shapes you. The real question is, are you still living inside the role it gave you? This video is not about boxing you in, it's about setting you free. It's about returning to the beginning, not to blame or regret, but to understand the forces that shaped your earliest self. Because once you understand the origin of your patterns, you can begin the sacred work of rewriting them. What if the position you were born into wasn't just family dynamics, but destiny's way of whispering your first myth into your soul? That's where we begin. Let's go back to where it all started. What if the praise you've carried your whole life was actually a quiet form of pressure? What if every "you're so mature for your age" was never about your wisdom, but about your family's unspoken need for you to grow up too fast? In many families, the firstborn is not just a child. They are the unintentional experiment, the emotional scaffolding for their parents' own unmet needs. Before they can even speak, they become the blueprint, expected to lead, to perform, to succeed. They are often the first to be photographed, the first to be compared, and the first to be silently tasked with setting the emotional tone for the entire household. This isn't just a cultural pattern, it's an archetypal wound, and for many firstborns, especially those now in midlife, it shows up as a chronic inner voice that whispers, "You are only loved when you are useful." Jung taught that the persona, the mask we wear to survive in the world, is often shaped by our earliest attempts to win love and avoid rejection. For firstborns, this mask is forged in responsibility. They become the achievers, the caretakers, the fixers. But underneath that shiny exterior often lives a deep exhaustion, a soul that was never allowed to rest, a child who never got to just be. Did you ever notice how you struggle to ask for help? Or how you often feel safer when you're giving than when you're receiving? These aren't random habits. They are survival strategies that once kept you emotionally safe in a family that unconsciously relied on your strength. You learned to carry others, but never learned to let anyone carry you. And while the world might reward this with admiration, your inner world may be aching with loneliness. This is the burden no one talks about. The burnout that doesn't come from doing too much, but from being needed too early. Firstborns are often tasked with being the emotional parent to younger siblings, the peacekeeper between arguing adults, or the example that others must follow. They rarely had the luxury of rebellion or failure. Even their softness was shaped to appear strong. Jung would call this a complex, a cluster of unconscious emotions that control behavior. The firstborn complex drives you to overachieve, but not out of joy, out of fear that your worth is tied to your usefulness. You become addicted to control because chaos was never allowed. You become perfectionistic because mistakes meant disappointing the people who leaned too heavily on you. And worst of all, you may hide your vulnerability even from yourself. So here is the uncomfortable truth. If you're a firstborn, have you mistaken your survival mask for your true self? What would happen if you let it crack a little? If you dropped the persona and finally allowed yourself to be soft, scared, or unsure? In Jungian terms, this is the beginning of individuation, the process of becoming whole by integrating all the parts of yourself you've buried. And for the firstborn, individuation doesn't begin with doing more. It begins with doing less, resting, releasing, reclaiming the child who never got to just be a child. So we ask you now, what did you lose when you were praised for being strong? And are you ready to meet the self that was left behind in your childhood shadow? Let the comments below be your first whisper of truth. You're not alone in this. Have you ever walked into a room full of people you love, only to feel like no one really sees you? For the middle child, this sensation is not rare. It's ritual. While the eldest is crowned with responsibility, and the youngest is often showered with attention, the one in the middle drifts in a quiet in-between, absorbing everyone else's chaos while silently muting their own. Their emotional intelligence is sharpened through necessity. They learn early how to sense tension, diffuse arguments, and make themselves small enough not to add to anyone's burden. But what begins as adaptation slowly hardens into a mask of invisibility. In many families, middle children unconsciously become the balancers. They watch others more than they are watched. They become peacemakers in storms they didn't create, mirrors for everyone else's moods, and shapeshifters in a system that never asked them who they truly were. This psychological displacement becomes a kind of identity limbo, a life lived in reaction to others instead of from one's own inner voice. Carl Jung would call this the formation of the false self, a persona molded not from authenticity, but from survival. The middle child often learns that being agreeable, accommodating, and emotionally available keeps the peace. They develop a radar for everyone's needs but their own. And over time, this hyper-attunement can become a trap, one where they are deeply connected to others, yet strangely disconnected from themselves. Do you find it easier to listen than to speak? Do you often feel needed but not truly known? These are not random traits. They are echoes of a childhood spent harmonizing other people's energies while silencing your own. Many middle children grow up feeling emotionally overlooked, even if their physical needs were met. And this unmet need to be seen doesn't disappear with age. It follows them into adulthood, into relationships where they may give too much, into workplaces where they hesitate to take up space, into lives where they feel like background characters in their own story. This is the quiet grief of the middle child. Not dramatic enough to cause alarm, not neglected enough to be noticed, just slowly fading. And yet, in this shadow lies a gift, because when a middle child begins to turn inward, to listen to the voice they've long ignored, they often find profound strength. Jung called this the process of individuation, becoming who you were always meant to be, not who you had to be for others. For the middle child, this journey means stepping out of the role of emotional chameleon and learning to take up space without guilt, to say, "This is who I am," even if no one applauds. But here's the deeper question. If no one truly saw the real you as a child, how can you trust that your truth will be embraced now? This is the emotional threshold many middle children face. The fear that self-expression might lead to rejection. The fear that being seen could come at the cost of being loved. And yet, the only path to real belonging begins with visibility, not performance, not perfection, but presence. So, if you're a middle child who learned to disappear just to keep the peace, what would happen if you stopped doing that? Drop a comment below and tell us, what part of you was silenced to make others comfortable? And are you ready to let it speak now? Have you ever wondered why the youngest child is so often labeled the wild one, the rule breaker, the dreamer, the one who won't listen? This isn't a coincidence. In many families, the youngest is born into a story already in motion. Roles are taken. The eldest is the achiever. The middle is the mediator. And so the last-born, in order to be seen, must stand out. From an early age, they learn that obedience earns less attention than rebellion, that coloring outside the lines brings more reaction than following the rules ever could. And so begins the dance of disruption, one not rooted in chaos, but in a deeper emotional hunger to exist beyond comparison. In reality, many last-borns are not defiant by nature, but by necessity. They are trying to escape the invisible cage of always being someone's little sibling. Every step they take is weighed against what came before. Why aren't you more like your brother? Why can't you be serious like your sister? These comparisons spark an internal war between authenticity and expectation, and when a child cannot win at imitation, they often turn to innovation. Carl Jung would see this pattern as the stirrings of an archetype, the rebel, yes, but also the trickster, the one who disrupts not out of malice, but to awaken. The youngest child often channels this energy unconsciously, breaking patterns, questioning traditions, shaking the foundation of how things have always been. But beneath that playful, chaotic spirit often lies a deeper shadow. The fear of not being taken seriously, the fear of being forever dismissed as the immature one, the irresponsible one, the afterthought. Do you recognize this in yourself? Were you called too much, too sensitive, or too dramatic when all you wanted was to be heard? Did your ideas get brushed off as silly, your emotions minimized as attention-seeking? This emotional landscape often follows the youngest child into adulthood. They may become wildly creative, yet struggle with discipline. They may crave freedom, but quietly carry guilt for not living up to family expectations. And above all, they may resist responsibility, not because they lack the capacity, but because responsibility feels like a trap that threatens their sense of identity. This is where the shadow forms. In the avoidance of structure, the rebellion against routine, the need to prove that they are more than just the baby. But the real transformation begins when the last-born stops trying to escape the family system and instead chooses to transcend it. Jung's process of individuation invites the youngest to reclaim the parts of themselves they rejected just to feel free. It asks them to look at their rebellion not as something shameful, but as a sacred compass. Rebellion, when conscious, becomes creation. The last-born is not doomed to be the black sheep. They are destined to become the innovator, the one who sees what no one else sees, who brings new ideas into stale systems, who turns family wounds into creative breakthroughs. But here's the question. What if your rebellion was never about breaking rules, but about breaking roles? If you're the youngest and still feel like people only see the version of you frozen in childhood, what truth are you afraid to show them now? Drop a comment below. Were you the rebel, the dreamer, the one no one took seriously? What do you now see in yourself that your family never could? Have you ever felt like you were born into a conversation that no one else could hear? For many only children, this is the quiet reality that defines their early emotional landscape. Raised without siblings to mirror, challenge, or distract them, only children often grow up surrounded by adult energy, yet drenched in emotional solitude. Their parents speak to them in full sentences, involve them in mature topics, and expect a kind of poise far beyond their years. On the surface, this breeds early wisdom, but beneath that calm, capable exterior lies something else, a loneliness so subtle it often escapes language. The world sees the only child as lucky. They get all the attention, all the resources, all the praise. But rarely does anyone ask what it feels like to have no one to share that spotlight with, no one to confide in during the small rebellions of childhood, no one to whisper secrets to in the dark, no one to translate the emotional chaos of the adult world into something safe. And so, the only child retreats, not out of avoidance, but out of necessity. They create a rich inner world, because the outer one often feels too vast and too loud. Carl Jung believed that when external interaction is limited, the psyche turns inward. For only children, this becomes both a gift and a burden. The archetype that emerges is the solitary sage, a soul that matures quickly, reflects deeply, and often carries ancestral insight without knowing it. But with this inner richness comes a profound risk: isolation. While other children learn to navigate the world through the chaos of sibling rivalry, the only child learns to cope through hyper-independence or emotional overfunctioning. They become self-soothers, overthinkers, and often carry the unspoken emotional burdens of their parents. Can you relate to this? Were you the one who never needed help because you had already learned how to carry your own storms? Did you become the peacemaker, the perfectionist, or the invisible fixer in your household, not because anyone told you to, but because you felt you had to? These patterns follow many only children into adulthood. They may appear grounded and successful, yet struggle to truly connect. Intimacy feels foreign. Asking for help feels like weakness. Vulnerability feels unsafe. They've spent their entire lives being the responsible one, the good listener, the one who never rocked the boat. And yet, beneath that strength often lies an ache that no one has ever truly seen them. Jung's process of individuation offers a mirror for this invisible pain. It asks the only child to turn toward the loneliness they've spent years bypassing and to reframe it, not as a curse, but as a pathway. Their solitude gave them access to archetypal depth, to inner truth, to the ability to sit with themselves in ways few others can. But now, the transformation lies in opening the door they once closed to survive by choosing to risk being known, in allowing the very vulnerability they were taught to avoid. Because in the end, being strong alone is not the same as being whole. So let me ask you, did you grow up as the only one, quietly understanding everything, yet rarely feeling understood? What did your silence teach you? And now, Are you ready to share the world you've kept hidden all this time? Tell us below. Your story might be the one someone else has been waiting their whole life to hear. What if the role you played in your family as a child is still controlling your life today? Most people think they've grown out of childhood once they've hit adulthood. They get jobs, fall in love, raise families, make decisions. But very few realize they're still acting out a script written in the earliest years of life. That script wasn't chosen. It was assigned. It was shaped by birth order, emotional availability, unspoken family expectations, and the invisible roles each child was silently trained to fill. And the wound it leaves behind? It doesn't disappear. It hides until something in adulthood forces it to surface. Carl Jung believed that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This is the moment when that truth lands, because behind every adult overachiever, peacekeeper, rebel, or loner is a child trying to feel worthy, trying to belong, trying to earn love in a family system that unknowingly trained them to adapt in order to survive. The firstborn often carries the weight of perfection. They were the experiment, the prototype, the one who had to set the standard. They grew up fast, learned to anticipate needs, and were often praised for being responsible. But what no one saw was how deeply they feared disappointing others. Beneath their competence is a child who equated love with achievement and rest with guilt. Are you still chasing something that was never yours to carry? The middle child learned to disappear to keep the peace. Caught between the pressure above and the chaos below, they often became the bridge or the buffer. They were praised for being easy, quiet, and flexible. But that quietness came at a cost. They often internalized the belief that their needs didn't matter, that their voice wasn't loud enough to be heard. Have you spent your adult life being the one who's fine even when you're not? The youngest child carried the fire of rebellion. They grew up in a world already shaped by others and often had to find their value by disrupting the system. Humor, risk-taking, charm, or chaos, these were their tools. But behind that defiance was often a desperate need to be taken seriously, to not just be the baby, but to be seen for who they truly are. Are you still rebelling against expectations that no longer even exist? And the only child, as we've seen, holds the wound of invisible loneliness, surrounded by adults, yet emotionally unsheltered, mature on the outside, yet aching on the inside. Their strength became solitude, but that solitude often turned into emotional exile. Have you built a life so self-sufficient that no one knows how to reach you? Jung teaches us that these roles, these wounds, become the foundation of our persona, the mask we wear to survive the world. But beneath the persona lives the shadow, the rejected parts of us that still cry for attention. And the healing doesn't begin by doing more. It begins by remembering, by naming the child you once were and asking them what they needed but never received. Because the truth is, the birth order was never just a position in the family. It was a mythic role, a psychic imprint, a soul's starting point. And until we bring it into awareness, we remain actors on a stage we never chose. So, let me ask you, what role did you play in your family? And more importantly, are you ready to step off that stage and finally meet the self that's been waiting behind the curtain? Share below. You are not the only one carrying that silent story. What if the very role that once limited you is the key to unlocking the life you were meant to live? By now, you've likely seen your story between the lines. Whether you were the responsible one, the invisible one, the rebellious one, or the lonely one, Something deep inside you has stirred, because these aren't just childhood roles. They are archetypal initiations. Your soul didn't accidentally fall into that family position. Carl Jung believed that every human life is a symbolic journey, and your birth order was the first myth you inherited. It shaped the terrain of your early emotional world. It sculpted your defenses, your longings, your shame, and your dreams. But here's the truth. It was never meant to be your limit. It was meant to be your beginning. The patterns that were once necessary for your survival are now outdated maps. They helped you navigate a family system that didn't always see or nurture your whole self. But you are no longer that child. You are the one with the power to rewrite the narrative. Jung called this sacred task individuation, the conscious process of becoming who you truly are beneath all the masks you were forced to wear. And now that you see the wound your role left behind, you also hold the medicine. The firstborn, who carried the burden of perfection, can become the wise leader who sets boundaries without guilt, who redefines success as peace, not pressure. They no longer have to prove their worth. They can rest on it. The middle child, who once disappeared to keep the peace, becomes the powerful mediator who now speaks up, asserts needs, and trusts that their presence is not only allowed, but needed. The youngest child, who broke rules to be noticed, transforms into the innovator, the one who brings change, not through chaos, but through conscious, grounded vision. Their voice matters not because it shocks, but because it's true. And the only child who grew up in solitude becomes the soul keeper, a deeply connected individual who transforms loneliness into self-possession, turning sacred solitude into spiritual power. Each role, when brought into the light, becomes an archetype awakened. This is the moment where fate ends and free will begins. Because the minute you bring awareness to the story you've been unconsciously living, you are no longer a character, you become the author. So ask yourself, who are you without the role you were forced to play? Who are you when you stop striving to be perfect, invisible, rebellious, or self-sufficient? What happens when you stop chasing what was never yours to begin with and start remembering what has always lived inside you? The answer is not out there. It's been waiting inside your oldest wound. And now that you've found the door, the rest of the journey is yours to walk. The invitation is clear. Not who you were told to be, not who they need you to become, but who will you choose to be now? Let that question echo inside you. And when you're ready, share your answer, because someone else needs to hear your story to awaken their own. If this touched something sacred inside you, don't let it fade into silence. Like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Your presence here is not just support, it's resonance. And if you feel moved to give back, your donation becomes a quiet but powerful gesture that helps keep this light alive for others still walking in the dark.